and welcome back to Rising. I am back at the desk with Shermichael Singleton.
I'm back, guys.
Finally, Shermichael, the people wanted your return.
I'm happy to be back, Bree. I've missed you. I've missed our Rising fans. And Bree, we've come back with a lot of news.
There's a lot of news. I think we're going to have some healthy disagreement about what we're talking about in this segment. So let's just get right into it. As you're all probably well aware by now, for the first time in the country's history, the House of Representatives voted yesterday to vacate the speakership, ending Kevin McCarthy's tenure just short of the 270-day mark. In the end, the vote came out 216 to 210, with 208 Democrats joining the 8 rebel Republicans breaking rank. McCarthy spoke from outside the House floor shortly after the vote yesterday. Let's take a look.
My goals have not changed. My ability to fight is just in a different form. You need 218. Unfortunately, 4% of our conference can join all the Democrats and dictate who can be the Republican Speaker in this House. I don't think that rule is good for the institution, but apparently I'm the only one. I believe I can continue to fight, maybe in a different manner. I will not run for Speaker again. I'll have the conference pick somebody else.
And joining the Democrats, they did. Freedom Caucus member Matthew Gaetz faced boos from all sides of the aisle when he called out the Speaker for kowtowing to private interests.
When it comes to how those raise money, I take no lecture on asking patriotic Americans to weigh in and contribute to this fight from those who would grovel and bend knee for the lobbyists and special interests who own our leadership, who have boo all you want, who have hollowed out this town and have borrowed against the future of our future generations. I'll be happy to fund my political operation through the work of hardworking Americans, $10 and $20 and $30 at a time, and you all keep showing up at the lobbyist fundraisers and see how that goes for you. I reserve.
So the Biden administration weighed in on the ousting yesterday in a statement reading, quote, President Biden has demonstrated that he is always eager to work with both parties in Congress in good faith on behalf of the American people, because the urgent challenges facing our nation will not wait. He hopes the House will quickly select a speaker.
Okay, so I want to just characterize how this is sort of being covered, and then I want to get your read on it.
Yeah.
I think broadly speaking, Republicans, many Republicans, establishment Republicans, not the Freedom Caucus Republicans that Matt Gaetz is a part of, but establishment Republicans are saying this is a bunch of rebels who joined forces with Democrats in a way that is undermining to them and demonstrates their lack of solidarity with the broader Republican core interests to oust a speaker who was doing his job. And they're trying to tie this to the Democrats. The Democrats are saying this has nothing to do with us. Our job is not to step in and save an unpopular conservative speaker. Republican leader, the Republican majority is supposed to nominate the speaker. Of course, we're going to nominate our own speaker, Hakeem Jeffries, or whoever we want on the left-hand side of the aisle. This is your guys' problem. Don't stick it to us. The piece of this that I think is getting left out of the discourse is that there is a portion of the left that is very excited to see this power demonstrated, because this is exactly the kind of force the vote moment that people were advocating for a handful of squad members to do to Nancy Pelosi back in 2021. And at that time, many gatekeepers on the left insisted that they could not do this very maneuver that we've now seen demonstrated for the first time in history. And it seems to be a reflection of the real power a minority caucus can have in Congress to effectuate its ends, even if the progressive ends and the ends of Matt Gaetz are different. So I want your take on this.
You know, I'm not happy about this. I mean, I know Kevin McCarthy. I think he's a good man. Many of my closest friends worked for the former speaker. I think Kevin McCarthy has a successful track record of helping Republicans get elected, which is a part of the job, of supporting Republican challenger candidates. That is a part of the job. And I can't ever imagine, it's unfathomable to me, to imagine Democrats, with the help of Republicans, ousting a Democratic leader. Matthew Gaetz joined Democrats to do this. Democrats didn't have to vote yea on the motion to vacate. They could have voted present, thus lowering the threshold for McCarthy to keep his job. They didn't do that. You cannot have a minority take hostage the majority. 200 plus members, 96% of Republicans wanted Kevin McCarthy. And his argument that McCarthy kept breaking promises isn't true. Saturday, McCarthy agreed and supported the 8% reduction in spending that the majority of Freedom Caucus members supported, including Thomas Massie, who supported the Speaker. He was going to negotiate that with the Senate. McCarthy said, if you want funding for Ukraine, fine, but you got to give me funding for the border, which was what most members wanted. Gates said, no, we're not going to do that. The Senate said, well, this is what we're approving. You got to get it passed. McCarthy didn't want to shut down the government because he realizes what history or precedent indicates, and that is that the party in charge of a shutdown is usually blamed electorally. He was attempting to prevent that. And so to me, this was a disastrous idea. We have a 4-seat majority. 18 Republicans sit in districts that Biden won. Bree, I know many of them. Many of them may lose next year. So talk about preserving a Republican majority. Yeah, goodbye. Thank you, Matthew Gates.
Yeah, I mean, I understand why Republicans are upset, but this is politics. At the end of the day, whether or not you agree with Matt Gaetz' goals, and I want to be really clear, I largely do not, except for I have to point out that it's a real bad showing for progressives, for Matt Gaetz to be, whether it's just pomp and bluster and bad faith, he is making the case, one, as we just saw in that earlier clip, against the corruption of both caucuses, talking about how many of their political decisions are being driven by their donor base as opposed to their voter base, which gets booze, ironically, on the House floor in a way that I think, frankly, shores up the credibility of what he's saying, regardless of if it's good faith and regardless of if he personally takes corporate money as well. But then to also be connecting that to this issue of the war in Ukraine, which a majority of Americans do not support additional funding to. And for him to be the one grandstanding in a bad faith or not, to be making that case and saying that's the fulcrum on which all of this pivots, and to not be able to get any kind of aisle crossing and solidarity from the progressives in the House who ostensibly agree with him, who for a less than 24-hour period signed their names to a letter saying that we need to be pushing for negotiation in Ukraine. What was that? Was that last summer at this point? But it was quickly slapped down by Democratic leadership. For there to be no solidarity of interest there at the same time that the Democrats are bragging about the fact that their party would never show that kind of agitation, never show that kind of energy. Those progressives who herald themselves as the squad would never dare step to Nancy Pelosi and threaten to withhold their vote for her, and who are now bragging about voting in lockstep for Hakeem Jeffries, who literally has a super PAC that was aimed toward dethroning, unseating progressives, even when they're incumbents. And he said he wanted to protect the interests of incumbents. It really does show how power works in Washington and how Matt Gaetz figured out the real power that comes with a narrow majority. And it is, in fact, I'm sorry, that's the way the cookie crumbles.
No, I don't.
Incumbent on everybody else to negotiate with him.
No, you're right. And as much as I dislike it, it is par course. It's part of the course. And the next speaker, whomever the heck it's going to be, is going to have to deal with that. We have an impending government shutdown in 43 days. The Senate is not going to agree to anything that doesn't include funding for Ukraine. They got to figure that out. 54% of Americans, at least as of August, according to a CNN SSRS poll, to your point, do not want additional funding to Ukraine, Bree. And other more recent polls showcase over 60% of Americans saying, why do we keep sending money over here when we're in the midst of our own financial crisis? The Biden administration just gave work visas to 400,000+ migrants. We don't know who these people are. We don't know where they're going. You have Governor Pritzker out of Illinois saying this is unsustainable for my state. You have New York City Mayor Eric Adams saying we cannot afford to sustain this stuff. What are you doing, White House? What are you doing, Joe Biden? We need help here. We need some type of recourse. And the federal government is all but missing in action on this particular issue. And so in that regard, I think you're right, but I'm a political strategist. I'm principally concerned with winning. And I am concerned, Bree, that the perception of this to the American people, particularly Republicans in vulnerable states, or vulnerable districts, I should say, could backfire on us. And I don't want that to happen. I would like to preserve the majority. Hell, I would like to grow it. That's the objective here. And I'm not certain that this type of behavior is going to help, but we got to move forward. I don't like what happened, but I'm ready to move forward. I just hope we can move forward with consensus. And unfortunately, I'm not certain if that is going to be the case. I agree that we need to have a timeline on this issue with Ukraine. How often are we going to keep sending money? How long? 10, 20 years? I mean, let's look at Afghanistan. It was a nightmare. And then again, you have people right here in America homeless people. You have workers striking all over the place. You have the healthcare, I think, hundreds of thousands of people, Bree, that are going on strike. That's going to impact the entire country. People in America are fed up. And so in that regard, Matthew Gaetz is right. But was this the right way to do it?
It's the only way to do it. He used the leverage that was available to him. And I think you're right. You say you want consensus moving forward. What Matt Gaetz is doing is exposing where consensus lies in Washington. And consensus lies around war. And consensus does lie around maintaining a kind of status quo funding sensibility, which in large part, I agree with the social programs that the Republicans want to defund. But when Matt Gaetz stands there and says, at the end of the day, this is all pageantry, and Republicans are going to complain about spending, and at the end of the day, overwhelmingly hold up the Democrats' budget, he's right. Now, I think overwhelmingly I agree with that budget outside of the military budget. Again, I can't say enough times that I disagree substantively with the majority of what Matt Gaetz is arguing for. But what he is doing is crucial because he is exposing that the consensus is a figment of a consensus that is generated by a corporate-backed consensus of Republicans and Democrats. And he is sticking his head up and willing to be the nail that gets the hammer. But this is potentially why.
Politically at the risk of the majority, though?
His interest is not in protecting the Republican Party. His interest is protecting whatever his maybe personal political interests are and the interests of the people ostensibly in his district. And he is popular, I want to say this, in his district.
Yeah, he is.
So he won
36%,
the general,
right?
in his Republican primary, he got 69.7% of the vote. And the other two were like pennies. Yeah. And in the general election, obviously, he swept it in Florida with another 67.9% of the vote. So at the end of the day, it is for everybody else to come to him in the negotiating table. And again, it is worth noting that these are the kind of maneuvers that can be done over and over and over again by many people when there are these narrow majorities. And in fact, we saw Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema drive the entire Biden agenda for the last 2 years.
Senate,
And at no point, the American people need to start asking the question, why are the people who do this never doing it in the interest of Americans? Joe Manchin does it so that he can make money on dirty energy in his state, the poorest state in the union where people don't have health care and they're dying from black lung and coal mines like it's 1850. And Kyrsten Sinema's doing it for God knows what reason. Now, Matt Gaetz has half of an issue that's worthwhile and good here in the war in Ukraine. The real question is why all of these so-called populists on the right and the left who say that they care about things like Medicare for all, labor rights for American citizens, all of the actions that are going around across the country, the fact that 15 million people lost their health insurance in the middle of a pandemic because they lost their jobs, and we have this cockamamie regressive system called employer-based health insurance. People are out here getting $10,000 dental bills. There's $80 billion could have eliminated medical debt. $80 billion.
Yeah, well, that $80 billion went to Zelensky.
It went to Zelensky. And are Republicans advocating to bring that money home and spend it on canceling medical debt? They're not. And we have to be really clear about that. But what this episode, I think, demonstrated to us is that they could.
Well, that's a fair point. That is a fair point. And I actually cannot disagree or argue with that, Bree. But I am looking at this through the guise of electoral politics. And if you're a conservative and your position is, I want to advocate for a conservative fiscal or policy disposition in the United States House of Representatives, you can't argue for that if you have no power to usher it forward. And that's my issue with Matthew Gaetz. I'm not necessarily saying that Mr. Gaetz's position on Ukraine is wrong. Most Americans, as we have just stated here, agree with that position. Now, they may disagree on how to spend the money, and you're right in that regard. No issue with that. But do you do it at the risk of losing everything? And so then next year when Republican voters are saying, well, what happened to the majority? You just lost it. Because to the average American, it looks dysfunctional. It looks like Republicans don't know what they're doing.
We'll see what the American public thinks about this. It might look like some Republicans are fighting and that this is a healthy exchange and what politics is supposed to look like.
But would they think that, Bree, if the government shuts down, though? Well,
again, I think that the government shutdown and the issue of Matt Gaetz arguing specifically around who should be the Speaker of the House are connected but different issues. And so we'll see what happens in 40-odd days when we get there. Yeah. There's a lot more to discuss here. There's a discussion of who's going to replace Kevin McCarthy. Yep. Apparently, Donald Trump is throwing his hat in the ring. I'm sure we're going to continue to talk about those issues in future segments going forward. So please do stick around. More Rising for you after this.